Hello and welcome to another episode of the Business of Business podcast. This is Roy. We are the podcast that brings a wide variety of topics from a diverse group of professionals. We want to raise awareness of new ideas, processes, procedures, and also give you some actionable tips, and also put some people in front of you that may be able to help you if you're in need. Yeah, so today this is going to be a special release episode that we typically release on either Sunday night or on Tuesday, but this one will come out some point earlier during the week. I feel like it's a very timely topic. I don't think we can wait to normal release times, and we want to get this information out there. We know that COVID, it's taken its toll on businesses, and this could be a program that may really be able to help you out. So we're going to kind of get right to it, but just wanted everybody to know why you will be seeing this release kind of off schedule. So without taking up too much more time, I want to introduce Hunter Johnson. He is a veteran business strategy and management consultant who in the middle of the pandemic founded Tophill Advisors and his marquee program, the 90-Day Reorganization. He grew up in a family business that his grandparents founded over 4 decades ago, and that his father and brother continue to run today. He can empathize with the stresses and pressures of operating a small business. Hunter has a progressive track record at Academy consulting companies like IBM Global Business Services and Deloitte Consulting. He has extensive experience leading consulting teams that advise small business owners across the globe. Hunter, thanks so much, and welcome to the program.
Hey, Roy, thanks for having me. I'm glad to get the opportunity to chat with you today.
Yeah. I mean, this is so important. I'm glad that we were able to get connected. And like I said, I want to make a special exception for you to get this information out there, because I feel this program probably has the ability to help a lot of small businesses that may be wondering what tomorrow is if there is even going to be a tomorrow for them.
Sure. So I couldn't agree more. As I talk to different small business owners, I find that awareness of these new reorganization solutions is really relatively low. And then when I talk to different, accountants and professionals in their kind of sphere of influence, I'm finding that similarly the awareness there is low, and the need is kind of at an all-time high with the stresses put on small businesses by the pandemic. So really grateful to have the opportunity to if nothing else, raise awareness of this option, and make sure that some of these small business owners can save their business, if nothing else.
Right, exactly. So now, if you could tell us a little bit, not only about your background, but I think that if I'm not wrong, you formed Tophill Advisors just to take on this project of talking about the 90-day reorganization and getting that out. Is that correct?
That's exactly right, Roy. So I launched Tophill Advisors, as you mentioned in the introduction, last summer, and I came from a consulting background. And when it came to kind of who did I want to help, it was really the intersection of my skill set and my passion. I had a lot of experience, advising small business owners in the past, kind of grew up in that family business. So there was a lot of passion there. And then when it really became a matter of kind of what problem am I going to help them solve, obviously the most topical problem was an existential problem, right? Small business owners, their biggest problem is losing their business. So it became a matter of searching for solutions. How can you prevent small business owners from losing their business? There's a lot of solutions that are out there, PPP, EIDL loans, things like that. But a lot of those things were temporary, either kind of temporary fixes, or kind of loaded the businesses up with more debt. And when I came across the SBRA, the Small Business Reorganization Act, that's when I really thought, okay, this is a solution that can actually help, restructure businesses for success for the long term. And that was really when I said, okay, let me double down, triple down, kind of 10x down, specialize in this. This seems like the right opportunity for people that are truly in need, people that are in pain, that really need help. And that's kind of when I went all in and started launching this business.
Yeah, and I don't think that intuitively maybe we are, but I don't think we really sit down and think about the impact small businesses have. The latest statistics, what is it, like 70 or 80% of the economy is built up of small businesses. And then there's that trickle down effect because they all have employees that put money into our economy as well, that pay taxes, pay rent, go to the grocery store, do whatever. But when you kind of cut that off, when we lose a small business, and my understanding about businesses that have closed during this pandemic so far is that probably 99% of them aren't coming back. I mean, they are gone, and that's just it for them.
No, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think the economic impact or the economic contributions that small businesses have are huge. And I think beyond that, there's just a cultural impact, right? Is some of the places that really define the culture in our local communities more often than not are small businesses. They're not the mega corporations. Your culture is not built around the Walmart. It's built around
Exactly.
the local small businesses that really influence that. But yeah, I couldn't emphasize the economic impact in terms of employment, in terms of the dollars that go into those businesses stay in those communities. That that they don't trickle up and go off to places that are not local. So yeah, I definitely agree that that's an important aspect of it.
Yeah. And then we've got the that human aspect of this as well, that people losing their job. We've been fortunate to have a pretty robust economy. The turn down of 2008, it lasted, but it had an end in sight. And then but we've over the years, we've had a robust economy that if you lost a job, you could find one. It wasn't as good a paying, but now, we have people that have been on the sidelines for going on a year now. And it's not like, hey, I can go find this other job, because if that company, they've not only have they been cutting their employees, but now there's probably, 10 times more people fighting over just one position. And so that trickles back down to the home, raising kids, families, marriages, relationships. It's, you see families that are living out of their cars nowadays, and it's, it's just I don't know. I just can't even explain the devastation, that we've seen over this last year. So,
Right.
Anyway, let's talk about so this is the other thing about these programs is I think there were some misconceptions in the beginning of a couple programs where they were helpful at the time, but basically they kicked the can down the road for 3 to 5 months. And so I'll liken it to the rent protection program, is that for some people, it's not that is forgiven, it's that it's kicked down the road. So it's like now all of a sudden at the end of some point in time, you just owe this huge sum of money that you can't, you probably never be able to get out from under. So businesses have been the same with some of these other programs. And so I think that's another reason why I feel it's important to get these guys in front of somebody like yourself that, can help them navigate through what is a loan, what is kicking it down the road versus something that may be sustainable help where you're not going to come out at the end of this owing a ton of money.
Right. Yeah, I think the two big ones that I've seen are on with regard to the landlord and with regard to some of the loans, as you mentioned. So, there's a lot of small businesses that did get some relief from their landlord, but more often than not, it was in the form of a deferral versus just a full-on forgiveness. So it was, we'll allow you to pay 50% of your rent payment, but starting in 2021, we're going to start clawing some of that back. So you're going to go back to paying the original rent and then some. So that's something we see here kind of early 2021 is all that's coming to a head in terms of that those deferrals. It wasn't forgiveness in a lot of cases. And then on the loan side is it's nice to have that cash in the short term, but structurally it's not changing the way you're doing business.
Right.
And I think you're kind of a metaphor of kicking the can down the road. That's exactly how I think about that whole situation. So I think that's where these reorganizations are a bit different. Is it fundamentally changes the structure and the financial health of the business, and makes it more viable for the long term.
Okay. So if you don't mind, kind of, because I don't really know a lot about it, maybe some listeners don't, but can you give us a little bit of the background and
Sure.
like when the small business reorganization, I think it's the SBRA, if I'm correct, when the SBRA came out and kind of some things it can do for us?
Sure, sure. So I always kind of start with things that people are familiar with. So, so often we see in the news these big mega companies that are declaring bankruptcy. So you see a GM or American Airlines or a JC Penney, and the headline is American Airlines declares bankruptcy. And I
Right.
think the first instinct is people always think of what we call Chapter 7 bankruptcy, liquidation, right? But more
Right.
often than not, those big mega companies would often go the form of Chapter 11 reorganizations, and which means you get to reorganize and continue to run that business. And that's, I don't know how many people are really intimately familiar with that kind of process, but it's a pretty heavy process. It's an 18 to 24-month process.
Yeah.
There's a lot of heaviness in terms of just the documents and filings that have to proceed. You're paying a bankruptcy attorney $1,000 an hour for that entire duration. And for a
Right.
small business, even during their best of times, they couldn't have afforded that, much less when they're distressed.
Yeah.
So it was never really a realistic kind of viable solution for small businesses who got into distress situations. So as kind of toxic as our political environment is right now, and I don't want to, wade into that mess, but I will
Right.
say that they got this thing right. So Congress in the summer of 2019 put forth an act called the SBRA, as you mentioned, the Small Business Reorganization Act. And what it was meant to do was do exactly that, is to say, hey, Chapter 11 reorganizations work for the big guys. They don't work for the small guys. Let's fix that. So they put forth this bill. The president signed it in August of 2019, and they knew they had to kind of get some things in place with the courts and all the mechanics that were required behind the scenes. So 180 days later, it goes into effect. So February of last year, February of 2020, it goes into effect. And what it does is it takes traditional Chapter 11 reorganizations that the big guys always did and amends that law with the new Subchapter 5. You'll see it Subchapter V, just because lawyers are fancy and they use Roman numerals. But that new Subchapter 5 is the small business variety. And when I say it becomes small business friendly, it's now a maximum 90-day process. So that 18 to 24 months now
Oh,
is
wow. Okay.
maximum 90 days. Um, it's like any kind of big mega process. There's a huge ecosystem around it. I've mentioned all the lawyers and accountants that start, working on it and charging,
Yeah.
pretty generous fees. A lot of those creditors committees and a lot of the disclosure statements, and I won't bore you with all the details, but a ton of that is stripped away. So it's much more streamlined,
Okay.
much more
Okay.
lightweight, much faster. So that goes into effect February of last year. And then, as we know, right after that, the pandemic hits the US. All the shelter in place orders go down. Non-essential businesses have to close, at least in the short term, and small business closures began to spike. So in
Right.
that way, it was very timely. The unfortunate part of it was that, just as I mentioned, not enough awareness. Small business owners weren't
Yeah.
aware. The people that were probably most aware were the lawyers that traditionally work on these reorganizations, but it's kind of cannibalizing their golden goose, right? They're used to charging 6 and 7 figures worth of fees to do these
Right.
kinds of
Right.
things. Where now this is discounted by 90+%. This is not a super,
Yeah.
attractive alternative that's cannibalizing a lot of that traditional work that they have. So it wasn't necessarily great for them. They're not shouting
Yeah.
this from the rooftops.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's kind of the timeline of about kind of right around the time that COVID hit
Interesting.
the
Yeah.
US is when this coincidentally went into effect. So in that way, timing was perfect, but awareness has been the unfortunate part of this story.
Yeah, and I think the 90 days is a good, well, a better time frame, because what I generally think about with the larger businesses, when they do the Chapter 11, people don't really realize that they're not totally bankrupt, like they have no assets. They usually have a stockpile of cash. What they can do is just see that they're not going to be able to cover their operating expenses, or their assets have been devalued so much that there's no worth there. So they start the process, where small businesses, they typically, when they get into trouble, they're typically out of cash, and that are very, very low. They don't have enough cash to sustain them for 18 to 24 to 36 months to go through that traditional cycle, regardless of all the crazy expenses that are tagged on to that.
Hmm. No, I think that's exactly right. I think, there are definitely situations where big companies are a bit maybe too proactive in terms of utilizing this.
Right.
They're forecasting, 40 months from now, we're going to become insolvent. So let's take this action now. Small
Right.
businesses, if anything, are on the other end of that. People coming to me that have $1,200 in their bank account, and there is a point where it's too late.
Right.
But yeah, I think that kind of ethical portion of, are we working the system, or are we doing something that's really right by everyone? I,
Yeah.
I think there's opposite ends of the spectrum, and the folks that in the small business community are
Yeah.
truly
Yeah.
in dire straits. They're in distress situations. Government restrictions in a lot of cases have put them in really bad spots, and they're trying to save their employees. They're trying to do right by their customers, and salvage the blood, sweat, and tears and personal equity, both literally and figuratively, that they've put in their business. So I think that is a point of difference there.
Another point I think may be worth making, and you can tell me if I'm right or wrong about this, but typically, what I have seen in the past is small businesses, especially more than the corporations, but they will, they just run right down to the wire, and the first kind of wake up call for them is, well, they missed the mortgage payment, or payment on their commercial property. They might have missed truck payments. They may have missed payroll, things like that. So it's usually something very dire sends up the alarm. And so I guess one thing we could think about, if that there's, in a lot of times it's because that there was no help there, and so it was like, well, we got to play this out to the end and see what happens. So I guess now, another message to this might be, small businesses, let's be more aware. Let's be looking out 2, 3, 4, 5 months. Don't wait until you're out of cash and it's dire, but there's something there for you now with the Small Business Reorganization Act. So be thinking ahead. If it's something, you may need to reach out to somebody like Hunter to say, here's my situation. I'm still solvent. We still have cash. We're still running, but at this burn rate that we're on now, if we continue this in 3, 4, 5 months, it's not going to be solvent.
No, I think that's exactly right. I think, small businesses by definition are more lightweight in terms of kind of the administrative functions that are sit at top of the organization. They may or may not have a CFO, or even if they do, they probably don't have a large team underneath that. So
Right.
unlike a mega corporation, they're not generally, reforecasting the business every month on a 12 rolling month basis. But I absolutely agree, that's more important now than ever. What I usually will guide and kind of coach is kind of the next 3 to 6 months. If your revenue, the faucet there,
Yeah.
turned off, and you are still incurring your expenses, especially your fixed expenses and whatever variable costs you would still have, how many months of cash do you have?
Right.
And is that in that 3 to 6 month range? And if it is, this is something you need to kind of sharpen your pencil on, and really know that you've, what tool you've got in your toolkit. And I think that's always been kind of the coaching is, what if your revenue goes to zero? And it's always been just like this science fiction scenario, like, why would your revenue go to zero? But it's more real now than
Yeah.
ever, right? It
Right.
very much can happen. You never know. Think crazier things have happened in 2020, and
Yeah.
extending now into 2021. So that 3 to 6 month range, I think, is the right range.
Well, and that brings up a good question for actually for you and Tophill is, if I'm a small business and getting kind of nervous and don't really know where I stand, can I reach out to you, before I'm insolvent, or are you basically only like picking up people once they realize that and kind of start that process, or can you help them maybe prior to needing that process?
Oh, for sure. I mean, that's always the first step is, we never want to put someone into a reorganization process who doesn't need it. So that
Right.
very first discovery call would be with myself and likely one of the attorneys that I have strategic alliances with. And we would sit down and really reassess your options. You know, are you headed to a liquidation scenario, and is that the only option? Are you eligible for a reorganization? Are you maybe in a tough situation, but you've got more degrees of freedom, and you just need to renegotiate some of the parameters in your business with your landlord, with key suppliers, things like that? Or is it just a matter of kind of a turnaround that you don't need to do anything necessarily structural, but it's just some kind of tweaks and things like that. So those are kind of the
Right.
four buckets: liquidation, reorganization, renegotiation, and then turnaround that we try to help coach you on in terms of kind of where you sit with your business today. And then in the event that it is a reorganization, then we can get rolling on that process.
Okay. All right. Yeah, that's good to know, because always, being proactive with this is that what I'm hoping is that this act can save a lot of businesses that prior to it, they'd just gone until it was over, quit, and went on. But now maybe if they can get out in front of it, get some help from somebody like yourself, there's maybe a lot more options available to them now. So that's definitely something to consider. So there's you spoke about a lawyer. So who are some professionals out there that kind of need to have their antenna up to, I guess, talk to their clients about who this may be good for? Maybe they could refer them to you as well.
Yeah, so there's three that come to mind right off the bat. The biggest one, I think, are accountants, so CPAs, bookkeepers, that whole kind of community. If I can lump those together, and I think they're in a really opportune spot for a number of reasons. One is they have some awareness by the nature of the work that they do of the financial health of these businesses, and two is they already have that built-in trust. They're already a trusted advisor for these small business owners. So to me, that's a really key ingredient is you've got both. You've got the knowledge and you've got the influence. So I think there's a huge opportunity there for them, and there's a couple of benefits to them. One is that they get to kind of elevate their status as a trusted advisor. They're always looking for new solutions to present to their clients, but frankly, more selfishly, they get to retain a paying revenue stream, right?
Right.
That
Exactly.
revenue stream won't disappear overnight. So that's a big one. Accountants. Two others that come to mind are you know folks that are in franchise development mode. Franchise development leaders is to make their franchisees aware of these options. So sometimes that's kind of the gray area between a mega corporation and a what we think of as a small business is are those franchisees. But we see quite a few franchisees taking advantage of these types of reorganizations, but they are in that kind of those franchisees are in that entrepreneurial mindset where they're just hustling, trying to keep the whole thing moving, and they're not they don't have the time to peruse all these different options. So to the degree those franchise development leaders kind of at the top can make their franchisees aware, that's another really critical one. And then the other one that I think is kind of an interesting angle is landlords. So we see
Yeah.
we see quite an evolution with kind of the whole brick and mortar based economy right now. Retail has been in kind of a transition state, if I can say it that way, for a while now.
Yeah.
And if I'm sitting here as a landlord, I don't want my tenant disappearing right now, because
Right.
what's the alternative, right? So I think a lot of landlords, as I mentioned before, kicked the can down the road and said, we'll give you some rent relief now, you're going to pay us back later. But this is a way for them to introduce an idea that allows that tenant to get relief not only from them as the landlord, but everybody in their ecosystem. So it's a more systematic relief package that comes to that tenant that allows for more long-term health. And
Yeah.
I think that can be a very savvy play for landlords.
Yeah, and kind of thinking about that, it's like a lot of small businesses work on very thin margins anyway. So even if business came back to 2019 levels this year, uh, the ability to pay 150% of that rent, or 125%, trying to make up for that, uh, that's just going to prolong their agony. And that's some things that I've heard about some of these other relief programs, is basically all they did was just extend somebody's misery for 3 or 4 extra months, and then they ended up going out of business anyway. So yeah, those are all definitely things to think. While you were talking, I was just thinking, like chambers of commerces, other business associations. This is something that all those groups need to be talking about too, to basically help their members out, because I'm sure uh, there's really no organization that hasn't been touched by this.
Oh, for sure, for sure.
Yeah.
The one that I think, well, not do I think, I see it in the data. These filings are public, so you can go in and see them. And the number one industry has been restaurants. Not surprisingly,
Right.
they've probably been affected most by government restrictions and things of that nature. And you were talking about kind of the low margins. I think you see that in that industry in particular, right? Is if you're a
Yeah.
restaurant with a 15% margin, you were probably doing pretty well,
Yeah.
amongst that, cohort. And then, not only did they get shut down, at least for indoor dining in a lot of instances. But when they pivoted, in to their credit, a lot of them did. But to delivery, those delivery services, they're charging 20 to 30%. So it's, how do you pay a 20 to 30% commission when you're at, in your best days, a 15% margin business?
Right.
That just doesn't work. So I think that's a crowd that, I mentioned they've used it. The amount of filings in general has been very modest.
Yeah.
There's probably been 150 restaurants that have reorganized, and there's been tens of thousands that have closed. So that
Right.
ratio is not where it needs to be, but that's definitely an industry sector that can
Yeah.
utilize this type of solution.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned earlier about franchises, but the the cultural section that you've talked about too is the mom and pop corner restaurant that's been around forever. And I've got 3 or 4 that we frequent in our area, that they just they have a family that's been running them for years, and luckily a couple of them have survived. A few have gone out of business, so we've lost that. uh, I don't We've just lost that family, I guess, that used to be part of our neighborhood. But then also these, the bigger chains, the Taco Bells, the Chick-fil-A's, and all those. Most of those are not typically a company-owned store; they're franchises. So that is where, making these franchise administrators or managers, making them aware of this program too, so they can help their franchises to stay around.
Hmm. Hmm.
Because I'm
Yeah.
sure that they've probably helped them on their fees and some, but still they typically have very high priced real estate, very high priced buildings, and a lot of fixed costs that don't go away.
Right, right. I think the data I've seen is a lot of the fast food is done pretty well through the
Okay.
pandemic. It's more the
Oh, okay.
indoor dining based
Dining in.
establishments that
Yeah.
are, and it's those kind of ones where it's a family owned, spot where
Right.
they've got whatever 20 tables in there. They've been kind of generation to generation, been around forever, and those are the ones that I think are the biggest shame, that they're in a tough spot. Everyone's trying to pivot. And I think that's where reorganizations can really come into play, is this buys you time to do a pivot like that. So an
Right. Right.
example, Snap Kitchen, I'm not sure if you're familiar with those guys, but they were kind of a
Yeah.
restaurant retail concept, healthy food, kind of grab and go kind
Hmm.
of deal. They went through, and each independent, store is set up as a unique LLC. So each of them file independently, but they're going through a major pivot right now through their entire strategy is to break those leases. They're getting out of that restaurant retail concept. They're going to go direct to consumer now, and they're utilizing these reorganizations to enable that whole strategic pivot, which is pretty
Yeah.
massive.
Yeah.
So, I think more than anything, people just need time and options right now because
Right.
pivot was kind of the term of 2020 that people used ad nauseum.
Yeah.
But it's hard to do that overnight, even if you're the most creative and the most execution oriented person. It's hard to do that. So
Yeah.
I go back to kind of that
And
degrees of freedom. This gives you some degrees of freedom to actually pull it off.
yeah, and it's like in any business, if you're known for something, you can parlay off of that and maybe have products that are related. But if you've had to pivot to something that's pretty much unrelated, it's basically like starting over again. So there is a lot of time involved in that for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So if I was to call you today and say, "Hey, Hunter, I'm really struggling in my business," can you kind of lay out that process? I mean, and there's two scenarios I'm thinking about. Number one, I'm calling like, I can see that things are kind of on the edge, but I've got some time. I'm not in a big hurry. And then there's the one that, I just not going to be able to make my some payment this month. So I guess there's one that's maybe has a little lead time, and then there's going to be one that the crisis is upon them immediately.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So kind of regardless of which of those camps you're in, the first step, so there's really a 5-step process. The first step is going to be
Okay.
the same. So that first step is reassess options. We're going to assess kind of your personalized situation and where it stands, whether it's status quo, renegotiate, reorganize, liquidate the business. Let's at least put all the options on the table and see kind of where you are. So there's that
Okay.
reassess options, step one. In the event that it is that situation where the reorganization is the path that's kind of most advantageous to you, we start going down that path. The next step, the second step, would be what we call reforecast the future. So what you have to believe, both yourself and get all the constituents in your kind of ecosystem, all those suppliers, to believe is that if you get this relief, there's a path back to viability, right? So that reforecast the future, there's a kind of strategy element to that, there's a financial element to that. The financial part is kind of a 3-year income statement projection. This is what we think you can get back to, because if you're not going to get back to viability, if there's not a path there, then there's no sense in going any further.
Right.
And then
Right.
the third is really when the rubber starts meeting the road. That's when you really start to invoke the filing. That third step we call recalibrate timelines. And what that's meant to be is that's when you file the initial petition, and we call it recalibrate timelines, because that's what invokes that 90-day stay. And that 90-day stay is like a pause button where your creditors can't call you, they can't show up at your door, they can't even write you. That's really that you can finally take a deep breath and say, okay, I've got 90 days now to get my act together and to
Yeah.
write the second chapter on this whole thing. The fourth is renegotiating terms. So I talked about renegotiating as an option kind of outside of the filing. Even if you go down the path of a reorganization, you're going to want to renegotiate with your key suppliers, with your landlord, things like that. And then the last is the fifth step is reinforce all these things legally, and that's where my strategic alliances with those different attorneys come into play. Is it's not going to just be us trying to do what we can. There's actually a legal process that's behind this, and that's prescribed by the SBRA.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's good that you have a group that you work with, because these lawyers will be familiar with the process. And unfortunately, sometimes you reach out to people that really may not know the ins and outs, and they can get you in more trouble. So this is one of those times to go with people who know the process. And, I've already gone down this path multiple times. The other question I have, though, is so let's say we get to the filings and maybe even the renegotiations. are you going to give them a plan and kind of walk them through the process? Or are you going to be actually involved in, if I've got a supplier that I'm meeting with tomorrow, are you going to come sit at the table with us while we talk?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And
Yep.
I think that's beneficial to all parties. I mean, I think there's a relationship element there. I
Yep.
think it's very easy to be objective when it's kind of a third party coming in to
Right. Right.
just say, here's the data, here's where the business is going if we don't get relief, and here's where it goes if we get relief, and let's
Yeah.
look at let's roll it all up very simply to an NPV. If give us relief if it's better for you in the long term, and don't if it's not.
Yeah.
And that no so that's there it's a very hands-on process for sure.
Okay. Good.
That's not only hands-on with you, but those different suppliers, landlords, et cetera,
Yeah.
that are in your ecosystem.
Yeah, and I think that's great, because the other part of this is managing expectations and credibility. That, well, if I come to you, you can make a non-emotional decision if I have a path out of this or not. And I think that carries over to my creditor, suppliers, whoever we're meeting with, is that uh, I'm always going to say, yeah, I'm optimistic. I can do this. I know, this path. Whereas as you, as a third party professional, I think that it just lends a little bit more credibility that you're not emotionally invested in this decision, and you're looking at it from a strictly, business, strategic, financial point of view, that there either is or there isn't. So, yeah, I think that's great.
And I think it sends a signal to the other party, whether it's the landlord, the supplier, whoever, that this is not a bluff, right? This is not a
Right.
negotiating tactic. This is real, right? This is
Right.
where the reality of where the business is at this time, and
Right.
we're either going to work together and partner on this in a way that's a win-win, or
Yeah.
we're not. But I think it cuts through a lot of the noise very quickly.
Yeah. So, if somebody, of course, we want you to be their trusted advisor in this for sure. But let's just say if somebody was looking around to try to choose an advisor to help them through this, what are some things that we should look for positively? And then what are some red flags that should definitely make us run?
Sure. So there's really three things that I would say that you should look for. So one, I would look for, is this professional that's trying to help me through this, do they specialize in this, right? So it could
Right.
be that someone's an attorney, and they can technically take you through this process if they're an attorney, but they could be a family law attorney, right? And
Right. Right.
and they're not, a special, they don't specialize in small business reorganizations. There's also a red flag side of that equation. If they try to sell their pants off that they've been doing this for 20 years, that's a red flag because it went into law February of last year, right? So
Right.
if
Right.
anyone tells you they've been doing this over a year, that's a red flag. So there's kind of a specialized, but if they claim to have a whole lot of tenure in that specialization, that's another red flag. I think you also want a one-stop shop, right? Because there's both a financial element to this as well as a legal element. There's those two pieces, and I think you're going to have to you're going to need both. And if you go find an attorney and then you go find a CPA and they don't know each other, you're going to get stuck in the middle of trying to orchestrate this whole thing that you have no
Right.
experience orchestrating, right? So
Right. Right.
finding a one-stop shop, I think, is very valuable. And then the third I'll highlight is really getting into kind of the scope and the pricing. Are they charging a fixed fee, in which case your upside is really capped, you know what you're getting? Or are they the type that comes to you and says, hey, give me a $25,000 retainer, I'm going to charge you $500 an hour, and maybe we'll overspend that, maybe we'll underspend it. I guarantee you they're going to overspend that, and you'll have
Right.
exhausted all that, 20
Right.
days in, and they're going to be asking for another 25 grand.
Yeah.
So my coaching there would be, find someone who will do this on a fixed fee basis, so what you're getting into. Because that's what coming into this, I knew I didn't want to be in that business where you just exhausted someone's resources who was already in a distress situation and caused them to go out of
Right.
business. I'm honestly in the business of trying to save these businesses, and
Yeah.
if we can know up front that we can do it, I'm going to do the deal. And if we know it won't pay itself back immediately, then we won't. And to me, it's
Yeah.
really as simple as that.
Yeah, I think that's an important distinction because unfortunately, disasters bring out a lot of predators, and it's like anything else. If you're not careful, somebody will just milk you for everything that you have left and leave you in the dust and not really care about it. And the other thing I was thinking about too is something that's cookie cutter, because this is it sounds to me like this needs to be an intricate look at everybody's business, because it's not just financial. There's going to be that strategic portion that will help lead you out of this as well. So I think if somebody comes to you with a 10-point checklist, that I would be concerned if they weren't asking a lot of questions about my specific situation in my business, because even though the program basically works the same for everybody, there's going to be a lot of individualization for each and every business.
Right. And that I 100% agree. That's always some of the funny parts of my initial discovery calls with who I consider a prospective client, a small business owner, is a lot of times they just come in and say, just tell me exactly what you do and what this new law is. And I want to say, I'm viewing it like I'm a doctor, right? Tell me your pain points. What have you
Right.
tried? But I don't want to just tell you about this surgery, right? That
Yeah.
might
Yeah.
be a fit. Tell me what your pain points are.
Right. Right.
I don't want to just force feed this solution if it's not the right thing. So
Yeah.
I think that's the right mindset. Or obviously I'm biased. It's the one I use, but
Right.
is
Right.
to have that doctor's mentality is let's understand kind of what those pain points are, what alternatives you've thought, and then try to problem solve from there.
Yeah. Yeah, because this is vitally important for people's not only their business or livelihood, but their personal life. But we talk about this with marketing and other aspects of businesses, that anytime somebody comes to you with the cookie cutter that this plan's work for 10 other people, I know it's always a red flag, because they don't know your business, they don't know your pain points, they don't know what you've tried, where you're at, how much money there's just so many things that people professionals need to have that discovery call to find out. Another thing that you find out too is we all like to work with people that we like. So if you have that call with somebody that you just feel like there's a rub or you don't get along, then that's going to be, because this is going to be a very highly charged emotional process for the owners, I can only imagine. And so you want to have somebody that's going to be patient and really feel like that they're working for you, working you through this process.
I no, I 100% agree with that point, as well as that's the hardest part about this, is just how emotionally charged it is. It's
Right.
emotionally charged in a number of ways. It's their baby, this business that they've poured their
Right.
blood, sweat, and tears into. One thing we
Exactly.
haven't talked about is the personal guarantees nature of this. So, like, in the event that they lose their business, a lot of times, because they've personally guaranteed their rent or some of their key suppliers, those creditors are now coming after their personal assets, right? They're coming after
Exactly.
their checking accounts. So it gets super personal. I had a guy that I was working with here recently down in South Texas, had like a birthday kind of place. Actually, it's pretty cool sounding place, kind of an arcade, laser tag kind of deal. As you can imagine, that business has been decimated.
Yeah.
Families aren't wanting to bring a ton of kids into an indoor environment like that. And I had been working with them, talking to them pretty regularly, almost every day. And it had gone about a week where I'd reached out a number of times and hadn't heard anything. I thought he was just ghosting me, and I wasn't really sure what to expect. And it was 2 Fridays ago, sent me an email on a Friday night that basically said, I'm not ignoring you. I've been in the hospital all week. I'm in the ICU. I had a heart attack. Um,
Oh my gosh.
and that's what really brought it home, is like, this is real.
Yeah.
This is real life. It's not
Yeah.
it's not a game. It's
Yeah.
the emotional side of this, the stress, it's very real.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Like they used to say, this is chess, not checkers. So and the other thing is it has lasting consequences, health wise, financial. So what I'm going to do is recommend everybody, of course, reach out to you, talk to Hunter, see how he can help you with this. And if not, then reach out to somebody. Try to and get out in front of this. as early as you possibly can, because you don't want to wait till the last minute. Sometimes we feel hopeless and helpless, but there actually could be some hope with this program or something else. We never know when there may be a way out. So please don't wait till it's too late. Let's reach out and get some help. And that's the other thing, unfortunately, with entrepreneurs or smaller businesses, there's that pride factor. I built this business, and I don't need anybody to tell me how to do it, or I don't want somebody getting in my business that intimately. It's it's hard to open up your books to somebody, especially if you are in a distressed position, because then I'm just saying, how I would feel like you've kind of failed. And we need to put all that stuff aside and say, it happens. This has been beyond a lot of people's control, that you just need to put that aside for a few minutes, and let's see if we can't save the business and move forward.
Mm-hmm. No, I think the ego and the pride are good in a lot of ways, just because they get you going. But I always come back to the employees, and you touched on it before, is the unemployment rate and the lack of alternative options in the current economy. Is what would your employees want you to do, right? And I think that's where you get to a point where it's okay. Ego goes on the shelf. We got to do the right thing by the employees, which more times than not is the right thing for the company. It's the right thing for everybody. And how do you take a pause and restructure so that there is that longer term viability that everybody benefits from. And when I say everybody, employees, owner, your suppliers, your landlord, everybody, because that's really what this process does, is you have to quantifiably prove to the courts that this is better for the suppliers than the alternative. So that's the big picture view on this whole thing.
All right. Awesome. Hunter, thanks so much for taking time out of your day to be with us. Such an important message, and I appreciate you coming on and kind of walking us through this process. So the other thing I was going to ask is geography. I know that you're just across town from me here in Texas. So is this something that you're only working in Texas with people, or are you working across the nation, or how's that working out?
So Texas is my primary focus. I mentioned kind of the two facets of it, the financial side and the legal side. I can perform my part of it anywhere, kind of agnostic of what state it's in. The strategic alliances I have with lawyers are predominantly in Texas. So I'm best suited to do this in Texas, but happy to talk to anyone really, really anywhere. And depending on circumstances, even other states, there might be a right fit as well.
Okay, awesome. Well, tell everybody how they can reach out and get a hold of you and get this process started if they need to.
Sure. So I'd point people to a couple different places. So one would be LinkedIn, is just looking me up, Hunter Johnson, and or my company, Tophill Advisors, on LinkedIn. I try to put content out there pretty much every day. I just find there's a lot of B2B professionals there that can benefit from this. So connect with me on LinkedIn and check out my website, www.tophilladvisors.com. Similarly, got a lot of content up there on my blog that you can spend some time kind of getting up to speed even before you reach out. And there's a mechanism there where you can book a call right there through the website.
Okay, awesome. Well, again, Hunter, thanks for taking time out of your day, and I'll get this episode out fairly quickly so we can make sure we can help everybody that needs it. Such a timely message. Well, that's going to do it for this episode of the Business of Business podcast. Of course, you can find us at www.thebusinessofbusinesspodcast.com. We're on all the major podcasts. We're on all the major podcast platforms. Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Stitcher, Spotify, Pandora. We're not on one that you listen to. Please email me. I'd be glad to get us added to that. Also on social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and this episode the video version will go up on YouTube once the episode goes live as well. So thanks again. Please share with your friends. This, again, not only do we want, more and better listeners for our show, but this is such an important message that please take the time to share it with people that it may benefit across your network. Until next time, I'm Roy. Take care of yourself and take care of your business.